Hello friends from around the world. Here in this Peace Hall in Auroville, in India, we meet again on this day on August 9 to discover together 7 steps to global peace. I must say right at the outset that it has always been much easier to make war than peace. Peace requires patience, understanding, love for life, of all life, rather than barbarism and destruction. So my presentation today may be a little longer than last time. It was today, 75 years ago, in 1945, that the second atom bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki in Japan. This bomb too, like the first bomb in Hiroshima 3 days earlier, killed some 100,000 men, women, and children. Perhaps more, perhaps somewhat less. No one is entirely certain. In wars, no one is counting. No one wants to count, especially when the numbers are into thousands, hundreds of thousands, into millions. 100 years ago, in the First World War, a war that was meant to end all wars, an Indian soldier, one of the 1.3 million soldiers enlisted to fight for the British Empire, wrote home from Europe, "This is not a war. It is the ending of the world." Another soldier observed that neither side had won, nor could win the war. The war itself had won. Here in Nagasaki, 75 years ago, it was far, far worse. In Nagasaki Peace Park, near the hypocenter of the atom bomb named Fat Man, that exploded here at 11:09 on the morning of August 9, 1945, stands a 10-meter-high peace statue of a man seated in repose, with his right hand pointing to the sky, to the atomic bomb, and the left hand towards the earth, praying for peace for all generations to come. Thousands of young students come here every week from all over Japan to be taught some history lesson about the horrors of the bomb and to be formally photographed in front of the grand peace statue, to cherish a certain memory, a very special moment in the history of Japan, indeed of the world. 5 years ago, in July 2015, I came to Nagasaki to this peace park from Canada on a little peace pilgrimage of my own, in search of some small but certain steps towards global peace. As a student of nuclear physics, first in India and then in 1960s at the University of Toronto, for years I was in awe of the achievements of science that seemed to have revolutionized the world by discovering the structure of the atom and the colossal power that lay hidden in it. Now, in the later years of my life, I was beginning to wonder if for the survival of our human family of almost 8 billion people and of our blighted earth, we need to discover a different kind of power that lay not in the atom, but somewhere else, in our own sun-drenched black holes and in our own dark energy. An energy that expressed itself not by belligerence and in weapons or wars, but in peace and in the celebration of peace and life. This peace park, created in 1955, is full of many symbols and memorials of peace from many countries. For many over the world history, both of their own personal lives and of their own communities and nations, is a festering graveyard of past resentments and hatreds that rarely opens any window of hope to the future. In 1955, in order to heal wounds of war between Japan and USA, and to open a little window of hope, Nagasaki and the American city of St. Paul in Minnesota became sister cities. Arm in arm, ringing some bells for peace together. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Yet in 1955, 10 years after the bombings in Hiroshima Nagasaki, and after the end of Second World War that had devastated some 85 million people, the whole world was still in the thick of Cold War. There was seething hatred and distrust between the USA and the Soviet Union for political domination of Asia and Africa in those early years of post-colonialism. In 1955, Japan was still struggling to recover from the ravages of the war, and China was a very large and poor country, nowhere on the economic or political scene of the world, except as another communist country. This was also the time when more countries were building and testing more and more deadly nuclear weapons. And the children in schools in the USA in particular were being taught to conduct duck and cover drills from radiation fallout by hiding under the school desks. It was then, in 1955, a very remarkable photographic exhibition was mounted at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was entitled "The Family of Man." It comprised 503 black and white photographs from 68 countries by 273 artists, quite a few of them from India. In its photographs from around the world, of children and of old people, of sorrow and pity, of suffering and mirth, the exhibition became a manifesto for global peace and the essential unity of equality of humankind, of the family of man. For the next decade, this exhibition traveled to many countries with thronging audiences everywhere, drawing more than 10 million visitors until that, more than any other exhibition in the history. In his introduction to this photographic exhibition, American poet Carl Sandburg wrote, "There is only one man in the world, and his name is all men. There is only one woman in the world, and her name is all women. There is only one child in the world, and the child's name is all children." Even in a very fragmented world, a noble sentiment like this still spoke of certain human unity and could still touch the human spirit across racial and political borders and divides around the world. Now in 2015, in Peace Park in Nagasaki, as I watched one group of Japanese students after another being photographed in front of the peace statue, I sensed the same universal human spirit. These students, with their youth and with their flamboyance, I felt could be in any country, before any grand statue of David or Shiva, of Lincoln or Lenin. They could be in Italy, in Argentina, in Cuba, in Congo, in India. They were youngsters and they were students. They were Japanese, of course, but above everything else, they were human. They were all part of one grand human family, sharing the same human spirit, yearning for the same human dignity. कबीरा कुआं एक है, पानी भरे अनेक, भांडे ही में भेद है, पानी सब में एक. We all draw from the same well, many different vessels, but one water permeates all. This message of oneness, or of our brotherhood and sisterhood, is an age-old message in every spiritual tradition, in every culture, in every civilized force, again and again, over millennia. Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family. Despite this most noble sentiment, the challenge always has been, and everywhere, who are the members of this family and where are they? In Papua New Guinea and Panama, in Bosnia and Bhutan, in Tibet, in the Amazon forest, in Iceland, in Ireland, and then to recognize and accept all these varied and distinct members of the grand human family, sometimes very varied and very distinct in color and costumes, in food habits and faith, in languages and looks, in their history and in their hopes for the future, in their notions of sin and punishment, of heaven and hell, all members of this crazy, glorious family. How to recognize and accept them all with dignity and as equals in spirit, before the law and outside the law, outside the codified and formal laws, as part of the unwritten laws, as part of the vast human culture, imbued in a certain exalted human spirit. Who among us truly acts and lives in that spirit? Which people? What country? When? Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks writes, "Nothing has proved harder in the history of civilization than to see God, or good, or human dignity in those whose language is not mine, whose skin is different color, whose faith is not my faith, and whose truth is not my truth." Yet in our often battered human history, behind all the skirmishes and strife, behind all the hatreds and fury, behind all the distancing and aloofness, behind all the ghettoization and marginalization that have gone on for centuries in one clever or insidious manner or another, there still always has been some persistent and tenacious yearning for living together in peace, in discovering some golden rule to live by. Do to others as you would have them do to you. This golden rule may be the most abiding, most eternal, most spiritual, most humanistic, most secular, most practical, most sensible, most ethical principle of life for peace and harmony on earth. The golden rule: do to others as you would have them do to you, is enunciated in every culture, in every spiritual tradition, across the world and across millennia. Abli Allah nur paya, कुदरती के सब बंदे, एक नूर से सब जग उपजा, कौन भले कौन मंदे. We are all children of the same Creator. From one light all has come to be. Who is good? Who is bad? These are all phantoms of your own mind. This light, this golden rule, is at the very heart of any and all aspirations for human unity and of oneness. I believe this rule is also the heart of global peace and the 7 necessary steps towards it. Now, in a family of almost 8 billion men, women, and children, living together in a global village, on a fragile, though tenacious planet, this universal ethics has to be, must be, at the heart of science and the art of living. Living together as a human family in this new age of enlightenment. Just as the power of our intellect, our scientific knowledge, and our organizational skills have changed our existential world, must it not be that our spiritual powers weave a different pattern for that world? The supermind does not hang on trees like a golden fruit to be plucked. It enters into the stuff of our lives and its structures, our very beings. So if I dream of peace, if on this special day of August 9 I explore with you 7 steps towards global peace, it is because I believe fervently that without spiritual imagination and commitment to global peace, not only our human family will suffer, but all life on earth will be threatened immeasurably. The very first and most crucial step towards global peace is to ask ourselves, in our schools and in our colleges, in our churches and in our temples, in our coffee houses and in our families, in our parliaments and in our laboratories, why do we fight? Why do we engage in wars? Are there alternate ways to feel strong and secure for all nations, big and small? We have been asking about discovering the causes and hence cures for various devastating diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, malaria, smallpox, all kinds of plagues, all diseases that have killed millions of people for the past 2,000 years or more. War is the most devastating endemic and epidemic disease the human race has to endure, and yet too little has been done to discover and eliminate its causes by intelligent early control, says Pearl S. Buck. War is not an adventure. It is a disease. It is like typhus, says Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the French novelist. Should we not learn dispassionately and scientifically about the killer disease of war, which has killed at least 128 million people in the 20th century alone, and has sapped so much of our economic and emotional energy through hatred, creating new enemies, and building ever new weapons of destruction? Do we know why we fight wars? Wars, it must be said, are very different from disputes and fights or skirmishes between cousins, in families, or between neighbors, or between street gangs. Wars are highly organized and gigantic undertakings by kingdoms and nations, with years of preparations and fortifications, with standing armies, and with deadly weapons, and with all the financial resources of a state and its people, invariably imbued with patriotic and religious frenzy fueled by hateful propaganda. Look at this picture. It says at the bottom, "Gentlemen of India marching to chasten German hooligans." I don't think these poor men recruited from India, 1.3 million of them by the British Empire to fight in World War I, were ever called gentlemen of India by anyone. And I don't think they knew the difference between Germans and the French or the British. They had never probably seen a white person before. There is no other collective human activity that is bigger, fiercer, more consuming, more demanding, more destructive, and more life-altering than a war. Any country, Japan, Germany, Russia, France, Korea, Vietnam, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, that has experienced the ravages of war, particularly on their own lands and on their own shores in the last 100 years, knows the brutalities and the barbarism of war all too well. A war takes years of preparation and indoctrination, of weapons of production and training, and it takes years and decades to heal from its devastation, even for the so-called winners. Only those who have never fought in a war glorify it. For others who have experienced its brutalities and barbarism of aerial bombing, gas attacks, nuclear radiation, whether at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or at Somme or Verdun, or in Tokyo or in Dresden, or in Vietnam or in Korea or in Russia or in Bangladesh, or in Iraq or Afghanistan, it is the devil's paw and hell on earth. Even when the soldiers are trained and brainwashed to act as though they are made of steel and they do not have blood running through their veins, or they know how to cry or moan with pain. We have talked for decades with ever-increasing light-mindedness about war and conquest, argued humanitarian Dr. Albert Schweitzer, as if these were merely operations on a chessboard. So many countries, including Canada, Britain, Australia, Belgium, USA, celebrate with all solemnness Remembrance Day and Memorial Day and Veterans Day to acknowledge and remember, lest we forget, the sacrifices made by the soldiers in various wars. But do we ever ask why the wars were fought in the first place? And why and how the soldiers and the civilians were sacrificed, sometimes for the pettiest of whims of certain politicians and warmongers. But unless we ask and explore this question again and again, as an essential part of school and college curriculum in every country and in every class, why do we fight and engage in deadly wars? We would forever be deluding ourselves into believing that for the security and defense of our countries, powerful armies are essential, wars are inevitable, that peace is a mirage. And we would convince ourselves that to survive in the real world, with freedom and without being run over by another army, we must forever fortify ourselves against the enemy with bigger and bigger armies and ever more powerful and deadly weapons as an act of patriotism to defend our nation against an enemy that is forever lurking around the corner. On April 16, 1953, in a moment of rare candor, American President Eisenhower, and a hero of World War II, spoke of chance for peace. He said, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. There are many who believe that violence, fights, aggression, wars are all an integral part of human nature. We all know how beating of children in schools and at homes, violence against women in families, cruelties against animals, slaves, servants, and laborers, torture of prisoners for extracting confession, hangings and lynchings, and other acts of cruelty and violence against so many have regularly been used for centuries in every country and in every corner of the world, often sanctified by priests and religious people, and still continue to be used in many places. But are these civilized ways of living? Are we not trying to say no to them again and again and again by making laws against them, by creating law-abiding societies? Then why is it that fighting, killing, destroying, assaulting, preparing for wars, and sacrificing our young in wars for conquest or in defense, or out of revenge, or as an expression of our imperial power, seem to many as embedded in our bones, in our genes, in our very being? For some, it is even our dharma, our patriotic and righteous duty to fight against the unrighteous enemy. Of course, it is easy to convince ourselves that we are righteous and the enemy is indisputably unrighteous. God is, of course, always on our side. How else do we create an enemy without an endorsement from God or from our leaders and priests and rulers? In times of war, you often hear leaders, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, saying, God is on our side. But that isn't true. In war, God is on the side of refugees, widows, and orphans. If God is on our side, He'll stop the next war. So now, as I am leaving, I'm weary as hell. The confusion I'm feeling ain't no tongue can tell. The words fill my head and fall to the floor. If God is on our side, He'll stop the next war. That is how warmongering and war propaganda have been a high art for a very long time, indeed. And many court poets and poet laureates have sung the glories of war. Forward, the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldiers knew someone had blundered. There is not to make reply. There is not to reason why. There is but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death. Into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Here you have it. Glorious, cruel, and foolish lies and propaganda spread so movingly, so elegantly. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Who was there to ask them or see them? How boldly they rode into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. As though they were not human, but stones. They knew no pain, no fear, no nothing. Such blind obedience is demanded by all powers, by all commanders, by all jihadists. That is how kamikaze suicide bombers in Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, without any chance of coming back alive. This is the mantra of all killers in all wars, not to reason why. This is the most cruel, most inhuman, most life-denying, and most foolish talk. And it has gone on in every war, after every war, in every country, in every warring nation, to recruit more innocent young men to fight and kill without ever questioning why. Can only Arjuna ask Krishna, why should I kill? Should not every soldier, each one of us ask of Krishna, ask of ourselves, why should I kill? No soldier in any army in the world is allowed to ask that question. There is not to reason why. There is but to do and die. There can be no peace. No peace between nations until more and more people ask this question. Why? do we engage in wars? Who is the real enemy? Why should I kill? That is the first crucial step towards finding some cure for this pervasive killer disease called war. We need to search together all psychological and biological roots of this disease, as well as its cultural, economic, and political roots. 100 years ago, in his search to find some cure for this disease, the great Albert Einstein, though he was a physicist and a mathematician, asked the famous psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud in Vienna, "Is there any way of delivering mankind from the menace of war?" Even as he called nationalism an infantile disease, the measles of mankind, Einstein asked Freud most sincerely if, as part of his nature, man has within him a lust for hatred and destruction. I'm not only a pacifist, but a militant pacifist. I'm willing to fight for peace. Nothing will end war unless the people themselves refuse to go to war. My pacifism is an instinctive feeling, a feeling that possesses me, because the murder of men is disgusting. Towards the end of his long and distinguished life, famous child development psychologist Jean Piaget concluded, the more one examines the mechanisms of life, the more one discovers that love and altruism, that is the negation of war, are inherent in the nature of living beings. To struggle against war is to act according to the logic of life against the logic of things. And that is the whole of morality. Of course, it has always been much easier to make war than peace. Peace requires patience, understanding, love for life, of all life, rather than anger, hatred, frenzy, fanaticism, barbarism, and destruction, and utter mindlessness. We see it on the faces of terrorists, in suicide bombers. Why are those faces hidden away in wars? We have seen horror and destruction in school shootings in USA and Pakistan. We have seen fanaticism and dread unleashed by a few terrorists in Mumbai in 2008, or in Sri Lanka last year. Such terror is minuscule compared to what happens in wars. In Europe, war is a disease which has been in the family for generations. No one is surprised when it makes another leap. Even the patient only attends to it with part of his mind, says Storm Jameson. Stop war? Impossible. There's no cure for the world's disease. The second most crucial step towards global peace, therefore, is to create a culture of peace and not of terrorism and perpetual cold and hot wars. The ever-increasing so-called defense budget of all countries, particularly of USA, China, and Russia, are a provocation to all other countries and a threat to peace. The ever-expanding defense budget of the USA, part of its very intricate military-industrial complex, is more than of the next 6 other countries put together. Is such a colossal expenditure not an incentive to engage in one war or another, year after year? With its involvement in endless wars over the last 100 years in every corner of the world, the USA has over 18 million living war veterans, about 13% of the adult population of the country, who have fought in one war or the other, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Korea, some even in the Second World War, in Japan and Europe. The new veterans of the last 2 decades from Iraq and Afghanistan may return home triumphant from a senseless and futile war. But for many, the wars within their own tormented minds and souls keep taking their toll. In the past 6 years alone, more than 45,000 American veterans have committed suicide, about 20 every day. Shockingly, there are more suicides by war veterans each year than the total American military deaths in Afghanistan and Iraq in the past 2 decades. Did we ever observe such death and suicides in war veterans in USA, Russia, India, ever before? Moreover, disproportionately higher percentage of military veterans have turned into mass shooters in their own country, involved in some of the worst mass killings of their own, in their own country and of their own people. There cannot be peace anywhere unless all countries, and particularly the rich and the powerful countries, stop building their armies bigger and bigger, and more equipped with deadlier and deadlier weapons each year, and flashing them at public parades for all to see and to be intimidated by, and to be envious of, trying to keep up with the other bullies. When we look at the size of the military of various countries, China, India, USA, Pakistan, North Korea, and the lethal power of each soldier, I wonder, we should all wonder and ask, is this how a country's young men and women are to be sacrificed for the sake of feeling safe and secure in this 21st century? Is this defense? Or is it not an offensive provocation to its own people and to others near and far? Ruthless power of military in Pakistan for years and decades, in Burma, Myanmar, in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Iraq, in Nigeria, in Chile, in Argentina, and everywhere, is a great threat to any and all feeble voices that seek democracy, lawfulness, justice, equality, and the rule of law. 6 months ago, in February this year, on his visit to India, President Trump signed 2 mega defense deals with India for military equipment worth $3.5 billion. Since 2007, USA has bagged over $20 billion worth of such deals with India, even as it has been arming India's arch rival, Pakistan, to the teeth for decades. During the same time, in February, a large billboard was hoisted in the city of Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin, in USA. It read, 3% of US military spending could end starvation on Earth. This billboard was sponsored by World Beyond War, an organization actively trying to explore the end of wars between nation states, and also by a chapter of the Veterans for Peace and Mothers for Peace. They were all asking, what 3% of the US military budget of over $750 billion, as indeed such budgets of all countries, including India, can achieve for the real security and well-being of its people and of the world at large. As step 2 towards global peace, all of us, the whole world over, should demand that the top 3 superpowers, USA, China, Russia, all 3 must undertake to reduce their military budget and the size of their armed forces by 25% within the next 3 years, and all other countries by 10%, all monitored and inspected by international commissions. After 3 years, All countries should commit themselves to continue to reduce their defense budget and the size of their armed forces by 5% every year, till there are no armies, as is true of some countries. What an extraordinary sea change it will bring in the world in a million incredible ways, releasing unknown goodwill and the sense of security in the world from these three international bullies and other bullies. During the devastating Vietnam War in 1960s, waged by the USA and its allies against an impoverished former French colony nation, Vietnam, the civil rights leader Martin Luther King moaned, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom." Spiritual doom it is, as also economic doom and social doom. Step 3 towards global peace. At present, there are 9 nuclear powers in the world, with enough power amongst them to blow up the world by sheer mad design or by some accident, to annihilate the whole human world and other living beings on land, air, and water many, many times over. For these past 6 decades now, as I shared with you in my first presentation, the whole nuclear weapons race has been driven for decades now by madman theory. Mad, mutually assured destruction. That superpowers would refrain from destroying each other, because both of them and the rest of the world would be annihilated in such a war. Both USA and Russia possess, and China rapidly joining the sinister club, an actual assured destruction capability that is very much known to the other and is very credible, with absolute certainty, the certainty of suicide, not merely to his military forces, but to his society as a whole. What amazing madness! To live in constant fear and fright, with mutually assured destruction hovering over us like a sinister demonic force. All in the name of what? Defense, security, freedom, power. So as third essential step towards global peace, we, the people of the world, in our schools and community centers, in our laboratories and temples, in our music halls and in our theaters, should demand that all 9 nuclear power countries in the world voluntarily and credibly undertake to dismantle all nuclear weapons within the next 3 years and never build them again. To do otherwise would be an unpardonable crime against humanity and against all generations to come. It may seem like a very tall, dreamlike demand and hope, but it is essential for our survival. If America and other countries can and did build atom bombs as part of the Manhattan Project, all within 2.5 years, surely it is capable of doing something equally exceptional for peace and life. We are spending billions of dollars for missions to the Mars to find some trace of microbial life there. And yet, at the same time, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars and our extraordinary scientific resources. We are relentlessly trying to find ways to destroy life here on Earth. On Mother Earth, with its millions of glorious life forms, the like of which, as far as we know, exists nowhere else in the vast universe, with its billions of galaxies. Let's dance and celebrate life. Let's sing and cherish the fecundity of life rather than the morbidity of fear and death. Is life on Earth so miserable for such people that they hope to find heaven only on Mars? Or is it the mere technological thrill of some possessed, disgruntled men who cannot have fun here on Earth? Is that a reason enough, all in the name of progress and scientific progress? Mankind must put an end to war before war puts an end to mankind. Step 4 towards global peace. Billions of dollars worth of weapons, old, new, and more new, that are being designed, built, sold to all countries and to all groups, including terrorist groups, is truly staggering, keeping the world forever on its edge, in fear, paranoia, distrust, animosity, real or illusory. To create truly sustainable peace, the whole arms industry in every country has to change. All of us must see the dangers inherent in such economies and such ways of living in a world of no new weapons to be designed, built, and sold. It is estimated that since 1945, since Hiroshima Nagasaki, more than 125,000 nuclear warheads have been made, mostly by the USA and Soviet Union, Russia, as much as 97%. The resources, monies, and technological and scientific talent in creating these ever more lethal weapons of destruction, such as hypersonic missiles, are acts of terrorism and utter sanity, and they must be resisted by all children, youth, adults, scientists, all those who love and celebrate life. So, as step 4 towards global peace, all countries, specifically USA, Russia, China, be asked not to engage in any research that leads to new weapons of destruction, nuclear or non-nuclear, or of any new delivery system, such as the hypersonic missiles. Such blatant power, whether its roots are in science and technology, or in fascist political ideologies, is demonic. Without ethical constraints, any belligerent power of man is utterly dangerous and is an assault on all notions of civilization. It's a crime against humanity, against peace, and against the miraculously complex phenomenon of life, which has been in the process of evolving and emerging over billions of years. As we all know, how every war in the 20th century has seen the use of new weapons and the destruction they have wrought, not only on humans, but also on fragile ecosystems that sustain life. For instance, more than 100,000 tons of chemical weapons were used in World War I, injuring over 500,000 troops and killing more than 30,000 of them. After years of very concerted effort, in 1993, an international treaty was signed banning the production, stockpiling, and the use of chemical weapons. Evil and destructive forces and tendencies among individuals, groups, and aggressive nations can be mitigated and thwarted only by a joint and concerted effort of those who value and celebrate life. Such challenges for the forces of life against the brutal forces of death and against the merchants of death are fiercer today than ever before. Perhaps it is because the temptations of power and money that static forces render to men and women of formidable intellect are far more seductive today than ever before. As well, our powers of rationalization, cleverly rationalizing any evil as necessary, even inevitable, turns every ethical issue into merely an academic debate. If terrorism is a scourge, those who invent manufacture and sell weapons are a much greater scourge on human civilization. Every theater of war in the last 100 years, 2 world wars, the wars in Korea, Vietnam, Bangladesh, the Baltic, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, the Middle East, and others, have all spurred the business of weapons. In 1957, General Douglas MacArthur, a war hero of World War II, said it even more starkly: "Our government has kept us in a perpetual state of fear. It has kept us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor, with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there has been some terrible evil to gobble us up if we did not blindly rally behind it by furnishing the exorbitant sums of money demanded. Yet in retrospect, these disasters seem never to have happened, seem never to have been quite real." I believe all our talk of being civilized or developed or advanced or peaceful nations pales unless we all are committed to finding ways to the reduction and ultimately elimination of the weapons of mass destruction. Just imagine if our intellectual, scientific, technological, and financial resources were used not to kill and terrorize our imagined and manufactured enemies, but for the well-being of life of all. What wonderful world could usher! For millennia, we have glorified wars, terrorism, valor, heroism, killings, and blatant power. It is time to have the courage to speak of peace and of peacemakers as our real heroes. Step 5 towards global peace. We cannot have peace on earth unless there is peace both within our hearts and minds, and peace and justice and fairness without, in our cities, in our neighborhoods, for children and girls, for black people and other marginalized folks, and between nations and between people of different faiths and ethnicities. When a person or a group of people are seething with anger or resentments, they are a danger not only to their own families, but to the world around them. A soldier may have been a mere killing machine 100 years ago, as 1.3 million Indians were in the First World War, on behalf of the British Empire, fighting in unknown lands and against unknown enemy. Today, such aloofness from those who one is called upon to kill in another country, on the other side of the globe, cannot possibly be so easy. Thus, as step 5 towards global peace, we need armies, not of soldiers, but of peacemakers, mediators, and arbitrators without borders. People who will be involved in creating peace and goodwill through yoga of forgiveness and reconciliation between their own country and the country or the countries perceived to be hostile to them, and mediate and arbitrate conflicts between nations and groups in different countries, and who refuse to join the armies of their countries and dare to be conscientious objectors. War will exist until that distant day, President John Kennedy warned, when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige that the warrior does today. Every school in every country, every college, every church or temple or synagogue can and must create such peaceniks who reach out across the aisle, as it were, to discover the essential oneness, the humanity of the others, through music and poetry, of shared experiences of youth and education, and of common interests, passions, and projects, where culture, in its vast sense, becomes far more important than the pettiness of politics and political bickering and arrogant hunger for power and control. I see this so gloriously here in Oroville, in this community of some 3,200 men, women, and children from over 60 countries. What is nourishing to the hearts and minds here and the spirit becomes far more important than trivial differences of ethnicity or historical distrusts and skirmishes that nurse only resentments, distrust, and alienation, and worse, a sense of revenge. How is it, one may ask, that Germany and France today are the best of friends after 2 world wars and after centuries of battles, skirmishes, and hatred? How is it that Canada and USA can share a 6,000-kilometer border undefended and cordial without any battle between them for over 200 years? Geography has made us neighbors. History has made us friends. Economics has made us partners. And necessity has made us allies. Those whom nature hath so joined, let no man put asunder. How can 28 nations in Europe choose to create a union with open borders after decades and centuries of hostilities and wars? In 1961, President Kennedy started Peace Corps for young Americans to reach out to the world, to see the world as something not to be dominated and conquered, but to be connected with and to discover. During the oppressive years of Iron Curtain, whoever could imagine reaching out to anyone, anywhere? Today, millions of young people are exploring Africa and Asia and Latin America with more openness than ever before. Each peacenik can indeed be a true peace ambassador of goodwill and peace between people and nations, breaking down barriers of prejudices, paranoia, and hatred, as has been apparent in Europe in the past decades, after centuries of irreconcilable hostilities and wars. Let's celebrate peacemakers and peaceniks rather than warmongers and the so-called warriors. In 1915, as the First World War was raging, a Canadian lyricist, Alfred Bryan, wrote A Mother's Plea for Peace. I heard a mother murmur through her tears, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. There would be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. Who dares to place a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? Let nations arbitrate their future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. Step 6 towards global peace. Never before in the human history have we experienced the trauma of a global pandemic as people of all countries and on every continent are facing now in the year 2020. Perhaps there is a great warning here about another apocalypse in the making, global warming. Its consequences of hundreds of millions of ecological refugees and fights and wars over natural resources that we have seen over some oil or over basic foods and famines as in Bengal in 1940s, and much more, could be 1,000 times more catastrophic than we earthlings have ever experienced before. To avoid national wars as an important step towards global peace, all of us, all over the earth, are being challenged to revision our relationship with all life forms on earth and with Mother Earth itself as the great womb of creation. Do we dare examine our ways of living, eating, traveling, using and abusing other life forms and natural resources, and weaponizing the earth? For instance, every year, in often cruel and unhygienic conditions, more than 72 billion land animals are slaughtered for food, almost 10 times the total human population. Many of them wild, exotic animals in so-called wet markets in several East Asian countries, as China, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia. The present crisis cannot be solved by science alone or by intellectual power. It demands a spiritual transformation in our values and commitments. It requires a radical shift in our ways of eating, living, and harmonizing with each other and with all forms of life. The microbial world, though hidden away from our human senses, is mammoth, and it is the foundation of all life on Earth. Though there is much that scientists have learned about this world, most environmental microorganisms have yet to be isolated and identified, let alone thoroughly studied. If all mankind were to disappear, distinguished biologist Edward O. Wilson asserts, the world would regenerate to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the equilibrium would collapse into chaos. Indeed, far more human beings have been killed by viruses, bacteria, and parasites that cause disease than by all the natural disasters of wars put together in our history. To our joy and dismay, we are discovering again that we live not only in the midst of a vast and global human family, but also in the midst of seething, breathing, microbial world. That is the keystone of global human health, as well as the health of the Mother Earth itself. Yet, we still have little predictive understanding of how microbial communities respond to various human disturbances, such as our vast numbers and our ways of using and abusing other life forms. I believe that we cannot create a true culture of peace and nonviolence unless we learn to treat our brothers and sisters in the living world of the non-humans with kindness and dignity. There are very significant shifts occurring in food habits in many parts of the world. Out of many considerations of health, attitudes of kindness towards animals, availability of alternate foods, and much more, there is a shift to vegetarianism, even to vegan foods amongst many. This is a significant and important step forward to creating the overall culture of peace. Step 7 towards peace. Out of the horrors and barbarism of the Second World War, there did begin to emerge a new global consciousness for the need and necessity for certain universal values. In 1948, in the shadow of nuclear radiation over Hiroshima Nagasaki, and World War II, after 3 years of very dedicated effort of such luminaries as Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly on December 10, 1948. It is a milestone document in the history of human civilization. It set out for the first time in human history certain fundamental human rights to be universally protected by the force of law and by new cultural and civilizational values. Despite its many failures in many parts of the world, I believe this declaration has been a very important step in bestowing human dignity to many who have been denied such dignity for centuries in 100 different and nefarious ways. In the 21st century, for the sake of global peace and as necessary imperatives in the atomic age, we need to prepare a universal charter of human duties to be taught, practiced and adhered to by all men and women and children of the earth, as earthlings, as global citizens, as children of Mother Earth, as a very special place in the vast universe of billions of galaxies. I believe we cannot proclaim to have rights unless we commit ourselves to certain universal duties. Duties and values of respect, recognition of dignity of everyone. Nations begin to dig their own graves when men talk more of human rights and less of human duties. And duties to preserving and sustaining complex plethora of life forces of the earth, and helping out those who are left out of the banquet table of life. This charter too, like the Charter of Human Rights, will also be enshrined in the constitution of each country and will have the power of law. Kabira soi peer hai, jo jane par peer, jo par peer na janai, so kafir be peer. Who is a true spiritual being? He who feels the pain of others. He who is oblivious to such pain is blind to the truth of life. Of course, it has always been much easier to make war than peace. Peace requires patience, understanding, love for life, of all life, rather than barbarism and destruction, and respect for one earth that nourishes us all, but also for all people on it, each with a different world in their heads. Freedom, justice, equality, dignity, the watchwords of our age all over the world, cannot be achieved through war, but only through peace, through mediation and listening, through empathy and compassion. Creating peace, I believe, is the noblest expression of bravery. It should be the dharma of every civilized person on earth. I believe that the wise and civilizing voice of Dr. Linus Pauling, 2 times winner of Nobel Prize, once in chemistry and once for peace, must prevail. He said, the only sane policy for the world is that of abolishing war. Will we dare celebrate the triumph of life in all its abundance and diversity over the sloth and avarice of merchants of death? You may never know what results come from your action, Mahatma Gandhi cautioned. But if you do nothing, there will be no result. Many years ago, something of a revelation came to me in the city of Waterloo in Canada, where I lived. This city, Waterloo, is named after the Battle of Waterloo, where on June 15, 1815, 200 years ago, the mighty warrior and conqueror Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated. This was a very cold winter day in Waterloo in Canada, with thick snow all around. There, one morning, near the frozen Lake Columbia, standing under an evergreen willow tree, I asked my 87-year-old father, visiting from India, "Father, what is the purpose of life? What has been the purpose of your life?" He responded somewhat shyly, quietly, "Perhaps it is to plant trees under whose shade you will not stand." All great trees take long time to grow. Dare we plant a tree of peace for life, for eternity? If a seed in dark, dingy water can grow into such a beautiful lotus, what might not you and I become in our journey to the sun? That is my hope, my dream, my prayer for peace. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Let there be peace. Let there be peace. Let there be peace.